Norma told me if you were waiting on her, you were backing up. We'll be picking up in chapter 15 in verse 7 tonight. We ended last week with one of the more familiar passages of Scripture. And it said that he believed in the Lord and he counted it to him for righteousness. What a wonderful verse that is, because that's how we're all saved. No works involved. You don't have to do this, that, or the other. You don't have to have 2 miracles to your credit and be dead 200 years to be a saint. You just have to believe. And that's all there is to it. It's faith. And so that's what we're talking about now. His faith. And God is now ready to actually ratify his covenant with Abraham. 15:7. I'll begin reading there. And he said unto him, this is the Lord speaking to Abraham, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another. But the birds divided he not. This is kind of a solemn ceremony here, because the Lord is going to make a binding contract with Abram, the covenant. He's going to ratify the Abrahamic covenant. Land, seed, blessing. And God is going to assure him about the ultimate fulfillment of this promise. What was Abraham's question? Whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Speaking of the land. This is a good question. He's not doubting God's ability. He's just simply saying, how will I know this? Can you show me something? So God tells him what to do. We're going to see in the next portion that God also includes the fact that they're going to be in captivity for 400 years. So he obeys God's instruction. So he took and severed in half 3 animals, a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old goat, she-goat, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove and a pigeon. He did, of course, cut in 2. Now, this is interesting. He's got them laid across from each other, just as if this side has rock and this side has rock, and he's got them against each other, so that there's room to move in between. And verse 11, it says, and when the fowls came down upon the carcass, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs. And they shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither. And the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. All of a sudden, the first thing Abram sees is the birds of prey swooping down on this carcass. And that's normal. That's what they're going to do. They're going to come down, and the unclean birds of prey, it's kind of an ominous omen there for him. He sees something evil in these birds, and God's announcement, though later, of enslavement, that clarifies the meaning of the attacking birds, that they're going to be enslaved for a while. The word afflict actually means mistreated, and it's the same Hebrew word that's used in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11 and 12, to describe Egypt's oppression of Israel. I'll tell you what, you couldn't have much clearer picture of the oppression and of the captivity down in Egypt and their slavery, 400 years. Egypt, like the birds of prey, opposed the covenant, and ultimately the covenant was going to be fulfilled. Nothing was going to stop it. Egypt would have been, in that time, the greatest power on earth when the family goes down. Later in Moses' day, when the Israelites went in Egypt, they could actually count the years and see that 400 years had elapsed, and it was time for them to get away. The deliverance from slavery was at hand. God said, they shall come hither again. Now in Exodus 12:40 and over in Galatians 3:17, it states that the Egyptian bondage was 430 years. Would have been from about 1876 to 1446 BC. Apparently, Genesis 6:15 and Acts 7:16, I think it's 7:6, they reference 400 years in round figures. Not meaning that whole 30 years. But you have to remember also something else. They were not slaves when they first went into Egypt. They were guests of Pharaoh when they first went down. If you remember, and we'll get to that, Lord tarries, and we don't go up, we'll get to it eventually. When Jacob brought the family down, Pharaoh greeted him. And of course, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. The greater always blesses the lesser. And they were sent up to Goshen to live. So there could have been 30 years there too, they weren't in slavery. But 40 years could be a rounded figure. At any rate, they could begin to count that 40 years. And I personally believe maybe they had 30 years of peace before that. But God is just. And he wished to permit the iniquity of the Amorites to be full before he would judge them. Again, God's long-suffering. He's given the Amorites time to come to him. You know, you say, well, was there somebody out there witnessing the Amorites? Well, did they need it? Do you really need someone to witness to you to understand that there's a God? No. He reveals himself in his creation. You can look at the sun and the moon and the stars and the mountains and the greenery and the trees, and you know there's a God. You can watch these TV shows and they talk about, well, 10 billion years ago, there was God, but we weren't here. And your relative may have been at 8, but mine wasn't. No. So you can look at what God has created and you know that he reveals himself in nature. And so that should actually lead you to saying, show me God. He reveals himself in his word. He reveals himself in his son. The Amorites had creation. Like the whole world, they're without excuse, as Paul says. Anything that can lead you to the Lord. Here, spring's coming. Now, between the sneezes and the wheezing, it's beautiful, with the flowers blooming and the trees coming out, and you know that's creation. In the fall, things get nippy, but the colors are beautiful. That's God. And it should lead you to understand that. And so God, in his long suffering, says, I'm waiting for the iniquity of the Amorites to be full. In other words, I'm giving them till the last minute to come to me. God will tolerate their sins until Israel under Joshua conquered the Holy Land. That's the kind of God we have. He's waiting. He's offering, calling. So thus the fulfillment of promises to Abram involved a punitive judgment on the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. God does not judge unjustly, but it's part of that. Abram's seed would get the land. But not 1 hour before absolute justice required it. It would be according to God's plan and purpose and at his perfect time. You can't rush these things. It's very much like people, and I think they really have the right heart. So we're going to pay to bring the Israelites back to Israel, trying to speed up the kingdom. It doesn't work. Well, wonderful that you want to bring them home, but you can't rush God's time. God had much to do before fulfilling his promises, including disciplining his nation, Israel, to make it fit for the promise. It doesn't take Israel, just like us, it doesn't take them long to begin to forget and pull away from God. No matter how much he blesses us, there are days when we just pull away from him. When you go through the book of Judges, you see this. They'll be up on high on the mountain, and next thing you know, they just roll down the hill, and they're in trouble. Oh, Lord, help us. And Lord helps them back up on the hill and happy. Next thing you know, they're back down the valley. They turn and pull from the Lord, and it doesn't take us long to do that. So Abram seeing this in advance was horrible, like watching the birds of prey. So God is letting him know, it's not going to be a bed of roses for you. You know, when you come to salvation in Jesus Christ, he didn't promise you a rose garden. He promised you eternal salvation, but you're going to have difficulties and problems here. You're going to be sick and you're going to feel bad and people are going to persecute you. But the end of the road is what you're looking at, the Lord. So in verse 17 and following, saying, it came to pass that when the sun went down, it was dark. Behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kezanites, the Kesmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. A lot of folks there. Dan is smiling because somebody always used to say, boy, that's a lot of ites.
Like Jay Vernon McGee used to say the electrolytes.
Electrolytes, yeah. And then the sun goes down. God reveals himself in connection with the image of an oven, a smoking furnace, and a burning lamp. And these are two elements that were connected with sacrificial ritual in the ancient world. These images are part of the burning motif that describes God's zeal and judgment in the world. Fire representing judgment, of course. This time fire represents the consuming, cleansing zeal of God as well as his unapproachable holiness, which are interrelated, of course. Isaiah chapter 6, verses 3 through 7 says this, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sun, I'm a wrong note there. It's supposed to be Isaiah, and I've got Genesis. So please forgive me, I don't have that reference right in front of me, but you can look that up. It's Isaiah 6, 3 through 7. So in the darkness, Abram saw nothing else in the vision except the fiery elements that passed between the slaughtered pieces of animals. And remember, it's dark. It makes a point of saying that. So thus the Holy God was zealous to judge the nations and to fulfill his covenant promises with Israel. He came down and made, literally cut, if you will, a formal treaty, a covenant with Abram, the Abrahamic covenant. And since God could swear by or confirm the covenant by nothing greater, he swore by himself. Hebrews 6:13 says, for when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. Now this is in other words, you see this is a unilateral covenant. You notice he does not ask Abraham during this process to do anything. He cut the animals, but he didn't do anything. He does not say, Abraham, you will do this. Abraham, you do that. All he says, as we go through the Abrahamic covenant, I will give you the land, I will give you a seed, I will give you a blessing. And you will be the blessing. It's literal, it's unconditional, and it's eternal. God says, I will do it. See, Abraham has done all he needed, faith. When he left Ur of the Chaldeans, faith. And that's what is needed here. He believed, it's reckoned unto him for righteousness. So its promises of this covenant are absolutely sure. And God even specifies the boundaries of the land that Abram and his ancestors, his descendants would have. From the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the great river, the river Euphrates. Israel has never possessed all of that land to this date. But she will. There's a time coming when she will possess the entire promised land during the reign of the Messiah in the millennial kingdom. That's when all of the Abrahamic covenant will be completely fulfilled. Right now they're in the land, but they don't possess all of the land. And they're still fighting and tugging, and we know that this because we're going to cover why here shortly when we talk about the birth of Ishmael. But the covenant here is so important and what they're going to have. So the Canaanite tribes that are listed are be the ones that are disposed later in the conquest. But as we go into Joshua, we find out that Joshua, another man of faith, did not obey God. What did God tell him to do when he went into the promised land?
Kill them all.
Kill them all. Take them all out. And he didn't do that. And so the problems began there again. When you don't listen to the Lord, the problems come. So, for Abram, God's message was clear. In spite of the prospects of death and suffering, that is the enslavement and bondage in Egypt that's coming down the road there, his descendants would still receive the promise. God assured it. God said it was going to happen. You don't need to know anything else. God cannot lie. And he says, I'm going to do this, he's going to do it. Now, if God doesn't keep his promise with Abraham, if he doesn't keep his promise with Israel, would he keep his promises to the church? No. But he keeps all his promises, and that's how we know that once you're saved, you're always saved. And everything that he tells us is true. We can have confidence in that. So Israel is encouraged by this when they get to the Exodus, as well as in those other times of distress that they're going to run into, even later in the Babylonian captivity, knowing God's promise. You notice that they know they're going to be there for 400 years. When they were in Babylonian captivity, God had told them how long they would be there. How long were they going to be in Babylonian captivity?
70 years. 70 years.
70 years. God told them. God cannot lie. These things are encouraging, or should be encouraging to Israel, and encouraging to us. So God's solemn covenant assured the chosen people of the ultimate fulfillment of his promises in spite of their times of death and suffering and enslavement and persecution, and when he's going to keep his promise. Israel also noticed that there's a parallel at the beginning of this narrative and with the Exodus of Egypt. Back in verse 7, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldeans. Now, Exodus 22. I am the Lord thy God which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. God said, I'm the one who brought you. Now, he brought Abraham out safely as protecting him. He brought them out of Egypt and protected them. So this assured Israel that in spite of the opposition and bondage, God would judge their enslavers and fulfill his promises. That's what God said he was going to do, and he did it. So this passage should also encourage the church, the New Testament believers too. God affirms solemnly that he will fulfill his promises concerning salvation, all the blessings that pertain to life, Despite opposition, despite suffering and even death, he keeps his promises. 2 Peter 1, verse 3 and 4. According to his divine power, hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in this world through lust. We have a promise. We're going to escape this. God is waiting for us. He has saved us. Now as we go into chapter 16, we're going to come into a problem that still exists today. You know, the cycle of this portion presents the struggle Abram, the patriarch here, underwent while waiting for God's promises to be fulfilled. We are so impatient. You know, at times he stumbled, but eventually his faith was proved. But he had a lack of faith again at the birth of Ishmael, as we start to look at that. You know, his faith is tested. It really is. And it's being developed. And the delay in God fulfilling his promise really caused him to question, and his knees buckled, spiritually speaking. What's a human? We have doubt and weakness, and we have a desire to help God do what he said he's going to do. Well, you know, if he doesn't ask you to help, why do you get in the way? You know, man is so impatient. We need to let God be God. And we just don't want to do that. You know, today we have the same problem. It's with the rapture. People have given up on the rapture because they're impatient. Oh, it's been 2,000 years. Well, look at Abram here. He's not even about 99 years old now. And the promise is not that old, but he's impatient. You don't be impatient. Wait on God in his perfect time. Human efforts to assist the fulfilling of divine promises just complicate the matter. When we get ahead of God, we cause such a mess. Later, Israel too was going to learn that when she tried to do things without God, it gets complicated and you mess things up. Even when God says you go over here and don't take one thing out of that city, you'll continue to have victory, and somebody takes a little something. Why are we losing? Why can't we take these? Because you didn't listen to God. You're trying to do things on your own, and listen to God and obey. So in verse 1 and following we read, Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children. And she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go to my maid. It may be that I may obtain children through her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to be husband to Abram, to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid unto thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said to Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her face. Oh boy, here we're already starting some problems here, already having complications. Sarah had no children for a purpose. God, this wasn't something God just thought up one day. He had planned this. Because this son of the promised land had to be special. Now, what could be more special than a husband at 100 and a wife at 90? She's well past childbearing years. It had to be a miracle. Just wait, Abram. A miracle is going to happen. But they're impatient. You've been promised a son. I can't give it to you. And then, humanly thinking, Sarah says, I give up. I can't have children. There's no way I can do it. The promise can't come through me. And she ought to know better. Because if the promise wasn't going to come through her, God would have left her in Egypt with Pharaoh. But Pharaoh never touched her. Because she is to be the mother. But this set in motion some rather dubious activities between Abram and Sarai. Abram should have taken a strong stand here, but he didn't. He is the head of the family. He should have put his foot down and said, no, we will trust the Lord. He doesn't do that. He learned, however, that God's promises was not to be filled in this way. He's going to learn that I did wrong. Now, it's not man's way. That's what we have to remember. It's not my way, but it's His way, and God's way is the only way. Abram's going to learn this lesson. But like most of us, we only learn the lesson after we feel the strap a number of times. I know that's child abuse they call it today, but the Bible doesn't agree with that. But sometimes over and over again before it finally sinks in. It was a legal custom of the day that a barren woman could offer her maid to her husband as a wife, and the child born in that union would be regarded as the first wife's child. That's what she's thinking here. If the husband said to the slave wife's son, you are my son, that's an adoption. It was that simple. He was the adopted son and the heir. This is man. This is government, if you will. So Sarah's suggestion was unobjectionable according to the custom of the day. Well, but it wasn't for God's plan. You know, when you have to choose between what's right with the custom, what's right with the government, and what's right with the Word of God, you take the Word of God. God didn't say you take Hagar and this is where the promised seed will come from. You know, God often rejects social customs. Social customs are man-made in most cases. Sarai's plan was with Abram's approval, by the way. It didn't take long. Scripture said it didn't take long to convince him. It turned sour pretty quick. After the Egyptian slave girl Hagar became pregnant, I can imagine that the problems began earlier than that. I imagine that there was a problem of jealousy right away. I know that Sarah took Hagar and said, okay, have a child with her, but don't you know that that Sarah was jealous? Don't you think that she was probably angry too, even though it's her idea? I'll tell you, jealousy. I'm sure she was jealous. And then after the birth, once Hagar found out she was with child, she began to despise Sarai, which just increased the whole problem. Both women may have wondered, what would become of Abraham's seed? Is it mine? Is it yours? Is it Rose? What's going on here? Would Hagar have it? Is she the... And again, the problem today, Islam says, oh yes, Ishmael is the promised seed. He's not. But again, the problem continues to go. So because of the conflict between the two, what does Sarai do? She blames Abram. You know, some things never change. What started in the Garden of Eden continues right here. The woman you gave me, she gave me that fruit to eat. The serpent, you know, and what does Sarai do? Abram, this is your problem. Why did you let this, that's basically, why did you let this happen? So, Abram has also learned something too, and he learns how to pass the buck. You handle it whatever way you want to, dear. You take care of the situation. Again, weak leadership. He should have put his foot down and taken the spiritual lead to begin with, and now what does he say? You handle it. Well, I'll tell you, that's wishy-washy. Here is a great man of faith. You handle it, dear. I'm not going to get involved with this. He's already involved up to here, but you take care of it. Then Sarah mistreated Hagar even more until she fled. Now Abram, who like Adam, followed the wrong advice of his wife. He's caught weakly in the middle. See, here again, Adam followed the advice of his wife. Oh, this is good, take a bite. And he had been there because she just turned right around and gave it to him. And he was there. Adam knew. So does Abram. He took the wrong advice. So Hagar is taken off. And verse 7 says, and the angel of the Lord found about a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou? And whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, return unto thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called on the name of the Lord that spoke unto her. Thou God seest me. For she said, have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Ber-Leah-Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Beard. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called the son's name which Hagar bare Ishmael. And Abram was 60 years when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abraham. Well, the story has a dark side, Sarah's mistreatment of her maidservant, Hagar there, and a bright side. The angel of the Lord communicated with Hagar in the desert. There's no problem. We see the dark side of the story. It's easy to see, isn't it? When the way of faith, which involves patient waiting, patience is so hard for us. When that's abandoned, the way of human calculation taken, just as they did, Abraham was caught up in a chain of causes, and the effects that would trouble him for years and years to come, right on up until today. Ishmael became the ancestor of the Arabs, and they're still, well, no other way to say it, they're hostile to the Jews today, still a major problem. But the angel of the Lord found the maidservant in the desert at a spring, beside the road on the way to Shur, the way back to her homeland, Egypt. Looks like she's heading back to where she knew, where she was comfortable. This is the first reference in the Old Testament to the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh. The angel is identified as Yahweh here, yet the angel is distinct from Yahweh. We know the angel of the Lord here is a pre-incarnate Christ. It's a theophany. And you can tell by what I am going to do. He's telling, I'm going to make him a great nation. It's very personal. The Lord is speaking to her. And he asks Hagar two rhetorical questions. When the Lord asks questions, and we'll see this later, when he's talking to Abraham on the road to Sodom, rhetorical questions are asked throughout Scripture. God knows the answer. For example, back in the garden, where are you? Who told you you were naked? Did you eat of the tree? God knew the answer. He knows the answer here, but he asks these rhetorical questions. Where have you come from and where are you going? He knew that, but there's something about prodding you to answer the question. When he asks this, you know he knows the answer. So don't try to fool him. Don't try to lie to him. Just tell him what's going on. God gave her two sure words. One was encouragement, return and submit. It's encouraging. You go back and submit. I'm going to take care of you. And the other is promissory. She's going to give birth to a boy. You're going to have a baby boy, son. You're going to name him Ishmael. Now, she called God him that seeth me. And to commemorate the event, she named the well at an unknown location, Birlea Roy, which means well of the living one who sees me. It's interesting in Scripture, things are named, places and people are named to represent something. She's at a place where the great God who sees me came. That's often, it has a message in Scripture when we see this. These are actually rhetorical devices that help us explain names. We know what happened here. We listen to what she said, so now you know why she named it that way. So thus the name is a reminder. I guess you call it a reminder device for us, for remembering the events and their significance. It's like building an altar. That altar is built there for a reason. God said, for example, the Passover, a memorial throughout your generation to remember something. And so these names are so you remember what happened and why. So God himself named the boy Ishmael, which he then explained, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Clearly he meant this primarily for Hagar. I see what you're going through. But it was also meant for Abram and Sarai. I see your affliction and I know where it's coming from. You see, God, so when you go back and you tell him the name, and you tell him the story, you tell him you saw me, you tell him what I said, and his name would mean this, the one who sees, and this, because the Lord has heard thy affliction, they'll know that they are the ones who caused this affliction. The name is powerful here. So, the other naming was Hagar, referred to as the one who sees me. And after her, that is, looks out for me. He looks out for me. So these two names, boy, there's a world of theology in these two names. God hears and God sees. And that's what he did. He sees, he hears, he knows. The spot would afterward become holy, a place where God could be found providing for and hearing the cries of his people. So the name provided the message. God spake a direct revelation, and Hagar responded in faith. Did you hear what I said? She responded in faith. It took faith to return back to where she had come from. God sees distress and affliction, and he hears. Sarai should have known this. This is a lesson also for Sarai. Since God knew Sarai was barren, what should she have done? Rather than send Hagar into Abram, cried out to the Lord. He hears. He's going to do it anyway. She needed to have faith. God promised that to Hagar that now she is going to be a matriarch. Her son would become the father of a great tribe of wild, hostile people living in the Arabian desert. But they would not be the promised seed. But they certainly are going to complicate the matter. Sarai's sin, caused the origin of the Ishmaelites, a harvest that's still being reaped today. In fact, Joseph, which was Sarai's great-grandson, was later taken to Egypt by A caravan of who?
Ishmaelite.
Ishmaelites. Isn't it interesting how the story just keeps rolling on and on? It becomes increasingly clear in Genesis that any person or nation that owes its existence to God's divine calling should live by faith. God called Abram, he needs to live by faith. Sarah needed to live by faith. Human efforts will not help. But the good news for God's people is that the living God sees and the living God hears. And I'm going to have to stop there because it's almost 7:30. I actually got the end of a chapter today. Isn't that amazing?